and welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres. This evening I'm going to be talking about a particular photo I took that I'd pretty much forgotten that I took. I stumbled across it in a folder of images taken several years ago, but I was just in a kind of particular mood where it grabbed me. So I wanted to talk a bit about that notion of photos which don't necessarily mean anything at the time, but at a later point can certainly have quite an effect, really, or kind of interest you in a way that maybe they didn't at the time. And then once I've talked about that, and there's various bits and pieces around that, I all go onto the critique section where I will be looking at images that have been sent in. Now, this is going out live on Facebook at the moment, so if you're watching on Facebook, please do leave a comment. Let me know where you're from, say hi. It's always lovely to know that somebody is actually out there watching. From my side of it, all I get to see is a webcam and hope that people are watching. But until I get the first comments, I can never be totally sure. Otherwise, if you are just catching the beginning, can't hang around, it will be up on YouTube, probably by tomorrow evening. And if you are watching this recorded version on YouTube, then please subscribe. But also, you can leave a comment, say hi. YouTube does let me know you're here, and I can respond to that as well. If you find anything interesting this evening and would like to sort of contribute towards the podcasts, if you look over on your right there, you'll see buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres, where you can give a little bit of a donation to support the podcasts. Right, okay, I think that's the intro. So what I'd like to do now is I will bring up that, and I will flip over to, not that one, that one. There we go. So what I wanted to talk a little bit tonight about is this photo. And now the thing is, I'm a people photographer, portraits, stage, narrative, scenes. People are the focus of the majority of my photography, or rather the majority of my published photography, my out there in the world, my promoted photography. Because the reality is when you photograph people, there's a limit to how often you can photograph people, unless you've got a very obliging family. And well, whilst my daughter's always quite up for a photo, she's pretty much the only one. So an awful lot of my photography, the majority of the photos I've taken don't have people in. You go out for a walk, you go on holiday, vacation, you find an interesting object in the garden or even around the house, or you want to try out something, you're experimenting with lighting, whatever it is, there's usually not somebody else around that I can photograph. But if I only did photography when people were available, then my photography wouldn't advance. There's a very simple, straightforward thing that you learn through practice, and practice. There's a lovely saying, I think it was Henri Cartier-Bresson, who said, your first 10,000 photos are your worst. Now, when you're starting out, that feels like a horrific thing. Oh my God, how many photos do I have to take before I start getting any good at this? But I also think that there's a certain relief in that as well. You don't have to feel that you've got to your sixth photo and it's not very good, therefore you may as well give up photography. It's an ongoing process. The more you do, the better you get at it. And the more photos you take in any genre, the better you get in understanding light, understanding composition, learning how to use your camera, what the settings are. When we start out with a camera, we get tripped up by the technology of it. What setting should I do? How do I adjust? Oh no, I've forgotten to turn this on or that off, or I haven't got it there, and why is it all dark? Whatever it is, we get stressed by it. the more you use the camera, the less you start worrying about it, until eventually it just becomes an extension of your thought. You know what you want to do, your hands move to the right place, you have the right settings. And at that point, the camera is no longer getting in the way of your photography. So you need to be taking a lot of photos as often as you can, just to reach that stage, if nothing else. So what's this all got to do with this particular wood? Now, what happened with this in this case, and the bit that I wanted to talk about tonight, was the notion of, usually when you are taking a photograph, you are chasing something, you are looking for a particular story. Now, it's something that those who watch these podcasts regularly will hear me talk about, is where's the story? What story are you looking for? Now, when this photo was taken, or the unedited version of this, I'll come on to that in a moment, I was out for a walk. It was a misty morning, and I was chasing something, and this wasn't it. And what I noticed is, well, basically I barely remembered taking these photos at all. But what happened was, I think it was last week, in fact, I was looking for a different photo, and I was rummaging back through the folders on my desktop, and I came across a folder of images of taking the morning mist, and I came across these ones of trees, and there was something about it that struck me. Now, the first photo I came across was this one. So obviously you can see I've pulled up, that looks like the roof of my car that I had at the time. So this was taken about 5 years ago. So I've pulled over, got out, gone for a little walk in the woods, because there's something I'm thinking is maybe there. Obviously the exposure is wrong, everything's really dark here, it's brightening out there. I change the settings on the camera, overcompensate, it gets all too bright. I take one more photo, kind of all right, but I'm not getting what I'm looking for. So I leave it, and when I get home, drag the pictures off the camera into the folder, and promptly forget about it. Now, last week, I'm not entirely sure quite what it was. Just, I think probably one of those things, where you wake up in the morning, maybe you've had a particular kind of dream or something, and you're just left with this sort of slightly odd mood, which doesn't really go away. And maybe a combination of something I dreamt about, maybe just, I don't know, I suppose the whole pandemic thing, or other things that are going on in your head. And I was in a sort of more melancholic mood when I came across the folder, and I came across this image, and this being the original. And it grabbed me. And it grabbed me, obviously, in a way that it didn't at the time. The simple fact that I only took 3 photos was a clear indication that I didn't feel I was getting anywhere, so I abandoned it. But here I was, nearly 5 years later, and I looked at it, and it spoke to me in some level, but I wasn't sure what it was. Now, woodlands are always a sort of slight place of other. Historically, evolutionary wise, we can go back thousands, tens of thousands of years, and our ancestors were much more probably used to being in the woodlands than we are. We, by and large, tend to live in much more urban or suburban living. Even a lot of rural living doesn't have a lot of woodlands these days. So it always feels slightly other. And mist always feels other as well. So mist in the woodland, there's something there. It's slightly melancholic. But what I also like about this, on a visual level, there's the depth. Trying to photograph woods can be really difficult when you're starting out because of where the light is coming from. Because most of the time, of course, there's more light out with the wood than there is inside it. So you tend to be standing on the edge of the woodland and you photograph inwards, and all the trees at the front are nicely lit up, and then it just goes black. and that there's no depth to it. You can't get that, you're standing there and visually your eyes are recognizing that there's all these layers of trees going back, but the camera isn't picking it up. Now with this, what happens is, because there is in fact light on the horizon through the trees, we can see there's patches back there as well. I mean, whilst the main source of light is coming from the right, there is light further behind, and it's that light behind which allows you to get the depth. That's the real trick when you're photographing forests or woods, is you want some kind of light through the trees so your eye gets drawn through the depth of it. So with that notion of, actually this really does look three-dimensional rather than the very flat kind of woodland that I usually end up with, and then there was the mist, and there, it just sort of twanged something in the way that I was feeling. So then I thought, well, okay, I want to chase this a bit more. So I'll show you now what I did. I'll just open up Photoshop here. Let's come back here for a moment while it's just, because as it stands, it's still not kind of, the balance isn't quite how I want it. So let's just open that then with Photoshop, and hopefully I should have opened Photoshop before we came in. Still thinking about it. Okay. Here we go. Okay, great. So now we've got this. Now the first thing about this is it's green. Very green. The color balance isn't quite right. Probably the white balance isn't quite right. And what you can see is, again, if I kind of zoom in here, the trees are on the turn. I think this was around the, what have I got on the date there? That's the 2nd of October in Scotland. So yeah, the trees are definitely on the turn. In fact, some of these are a lot greener than they usually are by the beginning of October. We can see the leaves on the turn. The ferns are definitely kind of past their best. They're going to be turning soon. Now, quite what to do with this, I wasn't sure. So one of the things I did is, there's a little trick, and I've shown this one before, but it's always worth, it's kind of a fun one to play with, where what you do is you go to the channel mixer if you're in Photoshop, and the channel mixer tends to default to your output channel being red, and this is the one that you want to have. So over on the right you can choose your red, green or blue channels, but we're staying on the red. Now, you can move these around, that makes it bluer, redder, the green, it's the channel, blue channel. They're all sort of doing variations. But what I'm going to do is, if I take the green channel up to 100, and then take the blue channel to minus 100. Now, what that's done is it's changed the greens into yellowy browns. It tends to turn the greens yellow and it makes blues richer. Now, blues aren't really showing up in this. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to this, just create a duplicate copy there, and then I'm going to open it in Camera Raw, because this is the kind of quickest way for me to show you how to do this. And up at the top here we've got the temperature balance. Now I can do auto, see what that does, and that, you see, it automatically turns down the green. So this is playing with the white balance. I'll go back, and what I might just do is just take the yellow. You see, if I move that becomes yellow. If I move it this way, it becomes much bluer. And I just want to knock it into the blue a little bit more, so that really it's down here where the mist is that you're getting a kind of bluer tint to it. Now, when I click OK and I go back to that, and now I'm going to apply that channel mixer. And what you see here is, instead of the whole thing being orange and brown, it's now much more selectively so. Now it's maybe still just a little bit too blue. So I'm just going to fade this one back a bit. And you see I can just move this slider and nudge this about until I get to probably something like that, really. And I like that. There's now something different to what there feels like. There's more texture, there's more variation. If we go back to that original, it's kind of too green. Whilst we've got difference in terms of light and dark, the colour palette isn't there. So by doing this now, we've got that kind of brown, orangey brown, bluish mix. It now looks much more autumnal. It looks like we've moved forward about a month in terms of the season. But that then added to that kind of mood that I was in, that sort of slightly melancholic state. It's so I felt, right, we're definitely onto something here. Now, again, if I just select all and I'll put a mixed version up here. And then what I can do is, again, and this is just very quick to show you what to do, is if I do the auto, it's brightened it a little bit. But what I'm going to do, I suppose, really, is I'm going to take up the shadows, bring a little bit more contrast into the shadows. Make the shadows lighter. Take the highlight down a bit, and then I'm going to use that. Oh no, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add in a vignette, and the vignette darkens the edges. You see that? And that just sort of brings your attention a little bit more into the centre of the picture. And then I'm going to use the clarity, which is kind of a bit like contrast, but a bit more selective, and just play with that. And that sort of selectively contrasts it up a bit. And so now we've gone from, this was the original, and we're now into this photo. And this photo is now giving much more of that haunting kind of feeling that I was after. So the last thing probably to do with this is, well, now this is a, yeah, I'm going to come back to this in a moment. For me, it feels like it's sort of leaning to the left a bit, although there are straight trees up further in distance. This prominent one just to the right here, and this prominent one to the left, and this prominent one here, they're all leaning slightly to the left. So I would just sort of straighten that a little bit. Actually, let me just undo that. I'll take out the content aware for the moment. So I'm going to straighten that a little bit, and then I'm going to maybe narrow it down, make it sort of slightly more landscapey, something like that, more or less. And that's pretty much where I ended up. Now, at that point, I can also selectively lighten and darken patches and what have you, and I think I ended up doing a little bit of that. Yeah, if you can see that, you notice that there's a bit more richness of tone. So I've obviously gone in and sort of darkened patches and that, but as a kind of quick edit, that takes you to the kind of thing that I was talking about. And that kind of did it for me. And it sort of grabbed me in a way that the original had something there, enough to sort of go, oh, there's something going on here, and then you're chasing. Now, the little editing sequence I've shown you is obviously much shorter than the original, because the original I was chasing it for much longer. I was trying all sorts of different colour casts, different white balances, different levels of contrasting, of shadow play, because I knew I was chasing something. But this, it kind of gives you the idea of the sort of the final cut, so to speak. But there was one other interesting thing that I wanted to bring up, which is I then reversed the image. And suddenly, to me, that has an entirely different feel. Now, I'd be interested in what you think with this. You know, if you're watching, please, leave a little comment here. Because this is one of these things I've talked about before and I will come back to again, which I find incredibly fascinating, which is the idea that an image that's flipped can be read in a different way. And I think, and I'm still waiting for somebody to give me a nice definitive answer on this, but I think the fact that here in the West, at least, we read from left to right, and so we start at the left of the picture and we work our way across, gives us the timeline of how we interpret it. And when it's this way round, we sort of, I sort of have a feeling of almost anticipation. We're starting here with the trees and we're moving out towards the light. And there's a sort of sense of waiting, like something's going to happen. They're watching for something that's about to happen. But when I flip it this way, it feels almost, it feels like after the event. It feels like something has happened and it's now, the trees now kind of feel like they're sort of almost reacting to. I'm really not too sure. I mean, I'm sure there will be people out there who are watching this who are going, for goodness sake, Kim, you are absolutely talking complete and utter. Insert word of choice there. And in fact, what's interesting with it this way round is I find I want to have it leaning backwards. So let me just show you here. Actually, I'll tell you what, let's just go, let's go back to here. Select all, copy. Because I'm going to go back to here before the crop, and then I'm going to flip it. Image rotation, flip horizontal. And actually, I think because of this feeling of it being almost a reaction to what was happening rather than an anticipation, the fact that the trees are no longer level but are actually now leaning slightly to the right feels to me like that emphasizes that story a bit more, like that it's almost a kind of reeling back from something happening. And again, I mean, if we want, we can just kind of pull that down, something like that, and crop it. So I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting one, and like I say, if you're watching, I would really be interested in your thoughts. Do you have a preference for whether it's facing one way or the other? In the this edited version here, that's the flipped version. That's the original. Do you have a preference, and why? That's the bit I'd be interested in knowing. If you can explain, and if you can explain, then that would be great. Even if you can't explain, just let me know which you prefer. I'm interested really interested to know how other people see this. It is, and I suppose this really kind of comes down to a powerful aspect of understanding with photography. Is there are things that you are chasing as a photographer, you are seeing, and which somebody else isn't going to see. I was with another photographer on this day, and he didn't see anything, didn't take any photos. But then, you know, yes, there's that idea. Two photographers can stand in the same place and see entirely different things because of that, what they expect to see, their life history, the story, what they're chasing, what mood they're in. What I think I find fascinating is that this photo, the two photographers are me 5 years apart and having to be in a funny mood one morning when I woke up. And it's that thing when you're creating a photo, the first person you're trying to satisfy is yourself. You are chasing something. What is it you're chasing? And the easier you can identify what it is you're chasing, the more sense it will make for what you do next with that photo, how you edit it. Now, there's a slightly different thing, which is when you're doing a paid-for photo where you have a client. And in that case, you have to really understand what your client is wanting. And then at that point, you are bringing in your expertise to interpret what they need. They might not even know how to express it. You have to use questioning and everything to sort of find out from them what it is they need and then provide it for them. But when you're out there just taking photos for you, you're chasing something. And I think that becomes interesting. So, yeah, I hope you found. I hope you thought that was interesting. Right. So what I'm going to do now, I'll flick back here and just see if we have any comments. Oh, do I have comments? Great. So what have we got? Robert from Texas. Howdy. Hi, Robert. Great. Glad you could make it. What did we say? Texas about 6 hours behind, I think. So yeah, you'll be about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Brian. Hi, Kim. Hi, Brian. Glad you could make it back. VG. Hi, VG. This is amazing. Oh, great. Thank you. Robert comes back. Agreed. Much more light. Aren't you happier? Is that happier with the? Unfortunately, Robert, I can only read the comments afterwards. I don't read them as I go, so I kind of need to flick back. So, not sure what were you happier with it flipped? Stacey, hi Stacey, glad you could make it. Very nice. I was a little late going on due to the storm we had earlier. Lots of rain and flooding in the area. All right, okay. Well, hope you're all safe from the storm. I suppose it's that thing of the first thing you think with a storm is, oh my God, are we going to be safe? Is the house going to be safe? Or is everybody going to be safe? And once you've got everybody safe, you go, how can I photograph that? Paul says dusk versus dawn in my mind. Yeah, I can see that. You know, is it sunrise? Is it sunset? They both have a different kind of feel to them. Okay, that's great. It's good to get the... Oh, Manoj has come in. The darkness spreading to the light. Prefer that. Shows hope. Okay, now that's interesting. Eileen's come in. Hi from Barra. Wet here too. Hi, Eileen. Oh yeah, Barra is, for those who don't know, is a small island off the west coast of Scotland. So it does tend to get hit by the Atlantic somewhat. So yeah, okay, that's brilliant. Nice to know I've got people out there. Great that you're commenting. That's really good. So next thing I'm going to do then is, oh yeah, Robert's just come back in. The flip looks happier than the original. And that almost goes against Manoj's idea, which is the darkness leading to the light, which is the unflipped one. Okay, VG, the first one I felt like a participant, and the flipped one I felt like a visitor. Ooh, God. I like this. I like the fact that obviously then I'm not the only one who has a sense of it being different depending on which way you look at it. So yeah, I think this will be something we will explore in future. I mean, I've done this before in the critique section. I've quite often talked about flipping the image because it does kind of change how you read it. So if you're ever uncertain with what's going on when you're editing it, always worth just flip it horizontally and see what actually happens. And sometimes you prefer it, sometimes it's just, no, it moves you further away from where you want to be. But it's always worth giving it a go. Okay, so what I'm going to do now then is I'm going to move on to the critique section. First of all, I will just say again, if you're finding any of this interesting, would like to contribute to the podcast at all, buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is the place for donations. Thank you. It's not compulsory, but it is always appreciated. Now, the critique section I'm coming on to for those who are here for the first time is basically I have a Facebook page also called Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, and if you just copy that into Facebook, you will find the group. So the Facebook group there. And if you join the group, then you can submit your own images. Stick a photo into the group and tell me a little bit about the photo. What is it you were trying to get? Whether you're happy with the photo or aspects of it that you felt were sticking points. And then I'll grab some of these and put them into the critique section of the podcast, which will be coming up in a sec. So that's your chance to put your own ones in and get a bit of feedback. The problem that we always have with feedback is we can very rarely get accurate feedback. As photographers, we need it. We need proper feedback because we are very close to the images. Sometimes too close to really feel that we can give any kind of objective reasoning. We might like the photo, but nobody else does, and we don't know why. The problem is we stick a photo on Facebook and everybody clicks like, but the people who are clicking like are your friends. and they're not necessarily photographers. So that they could well be clicking like, not because it's a great photo, but just because they want to make you feel good and because they're being nice friends. And that's lovely, except that it doesn't help your photography. So trying to get proper feedback is a difficulty out there in the world, online. So that's why I've kind of created this section for the podcast. So with that in mind, I'm going to now, let me see, I'll close that and close that, and I'm going to go over to the images that have been sent in. Now I've had a few different ones sent in. I'm not going to go through them all tonight, but I will make sure that each person gets at least one. And I think I'm going to start with Manoj. Now I'm going to drag this one in here, and right, so Manoj sent me 3 photos. I'll talk about this one and maybe another one a bit later if we've still got time. So Manoj says, "Hi Kim, first time posting here for the critique. Been a while since I went out for a shoot with my DSLR. Looking for insights from you that I can use in my next shoot outside. Mailing you the high-res photo as well." So that was useful. Manoj sent me this one as a high-res photo. Now, there's a few different things here. First off, you're out with your friend, you take your photo, she's leaning back at the tree, got a nice warm smile. That's what you see, that's what you take a photo of. But it sort of doesn't quite feel balanced. It's not feeling, the colours maybe look a bit odd. So what's going on here and how can we improve it? The first thing I would say is, well, the first thing that immediately strikes me is it does feel a bit oversaturated. The colours feel a bit kind of too strong. Now, that might be because I live in Scotland where the colours are slightly less saturated, and you live in India where the colours are brighter. But it does feel like the tonal qualities, the green is a very strong green, the purple is a very strong purple, and the face has become quite a sort of strong browny orange by contrast. But it also feels, along with that strong saturation of colour, it also feels it's quite the contrast is a bit strong as well. And what's happening is the darks are very dark. So if you look here at her hair, it sort of just disappears into the tree. We don't really have much of a sense of it going on. So there's detail being lost here. And in fact, if we zoom in, she is not in focus. And that's one of the sort of first key things with photography, is especially when you're taking photos of people, is you need to get in focus. And with people, with faces in particular, you need to get the eyes in focus. And in particular on that, the front eye, the eye closest to the camera. You can get away with almost everything else being out of focus, as long as the eye closest to the camera is in focus if you're doing portraiture. But this is a slightly pulled back portrait. Now, I then have to ask, really with this, the other part is VG, there's a huge amount of space all over to the left of this photo, which isn't really contributing to the picture. I will say, actually, I recognise that this is VG, who's also on tonight and submitted a couple of photos. At least I think it is. But what I was going to say is that there is all this room over the left, which isn't really contributing. We've got the fence over here, which, could be a tiger enclosure in a zoo. We don't know, or it could just be a fence. And then we've got this sort of muddy ground here. So it's not the nicest of surroundings, particularly. It's not enhancing. So she might be there, nice warm smile, and that's the bit you're thinking, great, grab a photo of that. But the surroundings aren't really adding to that. So you've also got, there's a lot of room up the top here. So if we go into the crop, you immediately want to come down because there's not a lot going in the top. If you were doing a kind of standard rule of thirds thing here, you would bring that across something like that. And now you automatically see that that idea that this a third of the way or 2/3 of the way across and a third of the way down, this is the sort of hot spot. That's kind of where you want to be. Except for the fact that actually this background still isn't adding anything in. So why not actually make it more into a portrait? At that point, again, we take this sort of third level across here, maybe move it back a little bit, and then the forward pointing eye is right on this central part, or rather this third. Let me just tell you what, because I'm not sure how much shows up, but in essence, the basic rule of thirds, if you take a line that goes third of the way across, third of the way down, and then kind of like that, obviously straighten that, but it's these bits here which is where you are trying to get one of your key aspects to the photo. Now, so I think that's a better frame for the photo. I'm still distracted by what's going on, but really, to be honest, I think the big problem is the out of focusness. Now, part of the thing here, the great thing, the really handy thing here, Manoj, that you've sent me, having sent me the original, means that I've got the technical details, and what I can see here is f5.6. That's fine. It's 1/25th of a second, which is very slow shutter speed. And the minute you've got a shutter speed that slow, you've got the potential problem for hand wobble. If you're not on a tripod, a 25th of a second is a slow shutter speed, and just the general wobble of your hands, however slight, however steady you think it might be, there's a point whereby your hand is going to be moving. You're going to be rocking backwards and forwards without even realizing it, and that movement is now going to start to impact and blur the photo. And then the other aspect to this is that this is at 300 millimeters, and what that means is it's very zoomed in. So I'm assuming you've got a 300 millimeter lens, you're standing quite a way back and you've zoomed in. Now the thing is with a zoom magnifies any movement. I mean, quite simply, if we take something like a pen, if I move this at this end just a little bit, this bit might only move up 1 millimeter. This bit has moved 1 centimeter for that 1 millimeter. And if you've got a zoom lens and you're zooming right in, this is your problem, is that any slight wobble here becomes a massive wobble here, which is really going to exaggerate the problems of things being out of focus. So one of the things you learn with your own photography technique is practice with the camera to see what's going to be sharp, where your sharpness level is. Now, some people, if you've got youth on your side, or you've got a particularly steady hand, some people can go down on your average, say 50, 70 millimeter kind of length. You might be able to get away with 125th of a second, 100th of a second. Some people can do 80th of a second. Some people proudly boast they can do a 60th of a second. Once you start dropping below 60th of a second, you're going to start getting this blur, this wobble. Now, if you've got a wide angle lens, that has the opposite effect of a zoom lens. The zoom lens exaggerates it. The wide angle lens, kind of, you've got a little bit more leeway. So if you can get away with, in a sort of mid-range lens, say 100th of a second, you might be able to get away with an 80th of a second or even a 60th of a second with a wide angle lens. But you would need to be, say, at something like 160th or even 200th of a second with a 300 millimeter zoom. And what I would say with this is practice. Go away and practice, and set up something. If you've got a garden area, or you've got a little bit outside the house, or you've got a particularly long room in the house or hallway, set up some bottles or cans, just like a shooting range, at the far end. Take your camera, zoom in, and try it with different shutter speed settings, and take the photos, and then download them onto the computer and see which ones are sharp. Zoom into 100%, that's a 50% here, and if I go, so take that zoom, so there's our 100%, and that 100% we can see she's just not in focus. So practice it, and so you get to know what your limitations are. And the part of the problem here as well is the auto settings on your camera won't necessarily take, it will prioritize something else. If you happen to take this on auto, and I don't know whether you did or not, most of the time that's fine. But the problem is when you get into a dark situation, it will prioritize ISO, and because it's dark, it will, the auto settings often slow the shutter speed down in order to cope with the low light. Now, if you know you can't cope, it will go out of focus at that low, then you have to find other ways of coping with low light. So you might, for example, open the aperture wider, or you might increase the ISO. I mean, I notice on this, the ISO is at 100, you know, which is as tight as you can get. But the fact is, if you've gone to an ISO, say, of 300, 400, you could have maybe had, I'm not exactly sure, there's a chart somewhere, but you could have easily got a 60th of a second or maybe an 80th of a second to get the same light level, which would have given you a little bit more leeway. So really with this one, it really does look like the focus problem with this has come out of the fact that you've got it on a 25th of a second on a 300mm lens. So understand your camera, understand your lens, understand your body, understand your own personal handshake, hand wobble or body sway. There's no, of course there will be certain people who testosterone driven macho-ness will be talking about, yes, well, I can hold it absolutely rock steady for 5 seconds and still have a pin sharp photo. Everybody boasts, we know this. But the reality is, for your own photography, know what your limitations are, and then that way you can work around them, and you won't fall into that problem. Second thing is, once you've got that, you've got to be aware of the background. Is the background complementing the subject, or is it distracting from the subject? And in this case, I would say that background wasn't doing the subject any favours. Sort of muddy ground, bright green with stripes. And this is the thing, I get it, because initially you see, oh, there's your friend leaning against a tree, great, take a photo, you know, and she's looking nice and relaxed, and that's great. And then suddenly, no, it's you're looking at the subject, you're not looking at the background, and so it's only when you get it back does the background suddenly sort of strike, because we kind of filtered it out. So I hope that helps. I hope that gives you something to go with. I'll just flick back here, see if anybody said Manoj. All right, the pen metaphor was perfect. I get it now. This was a shot with the arrogance of Zoom, the arrogance of youth on a Zoom, as you say. Tried for a bokeh and lost the focus of the subject. And yeah, that is VG. Right, oh, good. I'm glad. Yeah, right. Okay, I know that was VG. Thank you. Okay, great. So, next photo. What are we going to deal with here? I'm going to... Right. I think what I'll do then is I'll go with Stacey. Stacey sent me a couple of photos. I'm already up to 8:15. I'll just go with the one here for Stacey. Bridge Between Two Towns, this one is called. Now, Stacey says, I've taken this bridge from New Hope to Lambertville many times in different locations. It's an old bridge between two small towns, but has lots of visitors due to having a lot of small outdoor restaurants and unusual stores. Sounds like a nice place to visit. The bridge, not only for traffic, but also has a side for people to walk. It's located on the Delaware River. I thought this photography would be on the top. I got a good angle, symmetry, asymmetry. Am I missing something? It was close to winning, but it was not good enough. I also have the same shot in black and white. Okay. So you obviously put it into some kind of competition. You feel you got quite high in it, but it didn't get what you felt it deserved, which is something we all feel. The question then is, what could you have done differently? Was that deserved? I don't know what the competition was. I don't know what the winning image was, so I can't comment on that. But so taking this photo, so I can understand it looks like a really interesting bridge. We don't have bridges like that in the UK, at least not that I'm aware of. So yes, I can imagine it's one you would go back and photograph several times. Now, the immediate thing that strikes me, okay, there's three things that strike me with this one, Stacey. One is composition, two is exposure, three is color cast. Now, I'll deal with the composition first, because what I'm feeling here is, if you, now, on the one hand, is quite nice having this stretch out down the length of the, you know, it's a nice trick. You get a nice little diagonal going across the river. You've got a sense of the depth of the road and the bridge, and, you know, crossing the river. But I think what we've got here is sort of slightly confused horizon lines, or slightly confused lines that, if you, the bottom of this bottom line, the bottom of the bridge here, is very close to, okay, let's just create so I can show you here. This line that runs along here is very close to the river line there. Kind of almost a bit too close. And there's the feeling that you would either want it to sort of, if you squatted a bit lower, then maybe there would have been a bigger gap. And so you could have then had sort of parallel, you could have had echoing lines running along, which could have worked. Or you go a little bit higher and the bridge is then covering the water. And, you know, that makes it sort of slightly more interesting. You know, you're not distracted. The problem is that there's just not quite enough here. This little area under the bridge then becomes a bit of a distraction. The other one is at the opposite side of this, at the top of the bridge. What we have here is you've got the line running up the top of the bridge, but then we've also, seeing through the bridge, we've got the top of the trees here. And again, the gap isn't enough. It's just enough to sort of interfere with it without really giving it space to breathe. And so really with this, I think, Stacey, it would be really interesting for you to try different angles and literally either go lower, so you've maybe got much more sky that you're seeing through the bridge, or you go higher and actually sort of be looking down a bit with the trees kind of taking up more around it. I think either of those could kind of create a slightly more interesting. I think there's a bit here whereby it's almost sort of at that wrong bit. You sort of higher, lower might work better. So that's compositionally. Now, the second thing I talked about was the notion of exposure. And the exposure, where that's really coming to it, where that's really noticeable, is in your sky. What I can see here is that basically you whited out the sky. The exposure, presumably, it's not unsurprising. It's a bright sunny day, you've got strong shadows coming down. Now, if you'd exposed for the sky, this stonework under the bridge would then have become virtually black. But the problem is, because you've exposed for the stonework, the sky has whited out. Now then, what you've done is you've kind of darkened down the sky to counteract the fact that it was bright white. But because it was, you've lost any, because it was overexposed, you lost the texture in it. So now what we've got is we've just got a kind of a colouring over the top of it, which looks unnatural. And I don't think it's adding to the photo. I think I find it to be a bit of a distraction. And that colour also, I mean, it's a sort of slightly pinkish, purplish kind of colour. That adds, we've got the other problem, which is the colour shift itself. It feels sort of slightly oversaturated, but I think really what's happened here is it's too blue and green. It's too much on the blue and green spectrum. And now let me show you what I mean by this. I'm going to just make a copy of that layer, and I'm going to go up to Camera Raw Filter again. And remember, up at the white balance, if I click auto on that, now that's made it too yellow for my liking. But if I take this one, the blue yellow shift, and I nudge this up a little bit, not as far as the other one, but maybe just up there, so what's that? I don't know, something like that, and maybe the green purple shift just, if because it's very green, shift the purple a little bit like that. And now, do you see the difference? We've gone from that to that. And I think the colours feel a bit more natural. They don't feel as, that just feels like a kind of blue-green overload. It's like you've ramped the saturation up a bit too much. And this takes the, we've now got more of the richness. We've got the warmth of the stonework of the bridge cutting and offsetting against the blue of the water, the reflection of the sky, and the bridge. So in terms of your colour balance, I think it's always worth playing around with that a little bit. I mean, again, if I just copy that, yeah, I mean, that one does a similar thing. If I, this is your original. If you go up to image, auto tone, auto contrast, auto color, and you click auto color. And what you can see here is it's done something not dissimilar to what I just did. It's shifted the yellow. It's also given a slight auto tone as well, slight, a little bit more contrast with it as well. If you have Photoshop, again, when you've got colors, always worth playing around with. Just do a quick auto tone, auto contrast, or rather auto color and auto tone. Quite often give you interesting little variations, and sometimes correct color balances. So I hope that helps a bit, Stacey. So in terms of exposure, watch your exposure. You know, the clouds went, so you maybe want to play around with that a little bit while you're sort of sitting there. Play around with the different settings, see what you can. Sometimes you can, if you underexpose a little, you can sometimes draw out more detail from the shadows than you can from trying to draw details out of blown highlights. A little bit depends on your personal editing way of doing things. And then the color shift, and then compositionally, I can say, without being there, I mean, part of me also wants to stand back and see what the bridge looks like with space around it. Another part of me wants to go right in and, you know, get some nice kind of textured detail shots with some of these wonderful metal bars and ridges and all these triangles. You know, you could make some beautiful abstract shapes and lines out of that as well. But as you say, if it's nearby and it's when you go back to quite often, I'm sure that you photograph this in many different ways. So I hope that helps, Stacey. Right, do a little quick flip. What have we got? Fiji says, thanks Manoj for the click, and thanks Kim for the detailed walkthrough. That's good feedback for all of us. Right, that's great. Thank you, VG. Right, okay. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to Paul. So let's get rid of that. And Paul sent me this one. And then he also sent me the original. Now, and if I open that, we can see the original here. And so what Paul says is, hi Kim, this is another attempt at street photography. The original is very messy, so this is the original. So I cropped in and turned to mono. So cropped in, made it black and white. I liked the resulting image and called it Faded Star, which I was pleased with. But it had a lukewarm response at the camera club. Any thoughts? And then actually a little bit later, he did comment in the, just double check that. Did I have a, yes, he says, in the comments he put, oops, just realised you were our guest judge that week. That night, but I would still be interested to hear your thoughts. Well, I don't remember being the guest judge, I do have to say. But and if I was a guest judge, then that must have been at least a year ago, possibly more. So forgive me on that one. So I am looking at this one fresh anyway. So let's go back to this picture. So what you're saying, so this does it for you. You were happy, but it didn't get the kind of response you wanted for it. Now, I think really, there's two aspects to this. One is in the editing, the other is in the story. Um, First of all, I can see what grabbed you. So you're out there, this guy, yep, he's definitely standing out from the crowd. Um, I don't know where you were when you took this. Trying to kind of make any sense of the graffiti. Does it look like it's got a particular language on it? Not sure. So you might have been when you're in Hong Kong. Could have been when you're up in Glasgow. Not totally sure. Doesn't really matter. The thing is that what you're seeing, you're noticing this guy. And yeah, there he is. He's got his leather jacket with painting on it. He's got a big kit bag over the back, another bag here. Obviously travelling, long hair, beard, studs in the jacket. Quite a character. And you go, oh, that looks interesting. It's street photography. You grab your camera, click. So that's your story. Then you kind of you get back, you look at it, and you go, right, okay, I've got this. Oh my god, look at that bright yellow, whatever it is. What is it? To destination. Okay, all destinations. Okay, that's all written in French. So presumably you're in France, but you are a French-speaking country at any rate. We certainly don't have them in Scotland. At least I don't recognise them. So presumably some kind of bus tickets type thing. And yes, it does. When you look at that photo, it grabs all the attention because it's bright yellow. So what you decide to do is you say, where's the story? The story is this guy. And so you crop in and you go, right, okay, well, let's see, we don't really want that. So we could crop in like that. And if I was, that gives him space, except that we've still got this bit here and we've still got this bit here and we've still got that bit there. So let's go in closer and we'll try and crop out that yellow bit and we'll crop out that bit of hat as best as we can, and we'll maybe, and then we'll need to pull that down there and we crop in, and we're now getting really cropped in. We've still got a bit of yellow there, pull that one in, and so we end up with, yeah, more or less that. You're obviously trying to get rid of some of that helmet too. Where are we? Yeah. So that kind of crop, pull that in, yeah, make him a little bit more central. So the crop is giving you the shape for it. What you've decided to do is turn it to black and white because you don't feel like the colours are doing much here. Now the problem is here, Paul, is I think the black and white where you've done it is everything's become just, he's not standing out from the wall. If we go back to that, there's several different ways of converting to black and white. If I go to the hue saturation and I just desaturate, that's one way of doing it. I can also go to the gradient map, that's reverse, and I can do something like that. Now what we've also got is we've got quite strong light, quite strong dark, but what you've done in this is you've attempted to even them out. So I'm guessing, and again, very rough, quick thing, if I go to filter camera raw, you might be doing this in Lightroom or you might be doing it in, but as well as taking out the saturation, you take down the highlights and you up the shadows. And then the other thing we noticed about this was his jacket is in focus, his face isn't quite. And that's presumably, again, you sent me the original, so if I just look at your settings, 500th of a second, okay, so it's not a case of movement blur like Manoj had. It's 85mm, f5.6. I can only assume that what's happened is the camera has focused on the bag here. There's bits of texture in it, so it's focused. The focal point has run off just in front of his face, so his face isn't quite there. So then what you've done is you've upped the texture and maybe the clarity a little bit to try and bring a little bit more sharpness to kind of counteract that. And we end up with that, which, okay, yours is slightly darker, but isn't a million miles away. Um, but the problem is it now it's moved into the realms of the unnatural, because I think you've tried to even out the highlights and you've tried to even out the dark. You've pulled everything into the middle, and it just sort of washes into each other. He no longer stands out really from the background. Whereas if you straightforwardly did a gradient map, I think the fact that you've got a triangle of light coming down on him maybe emphasize, that sort of draws more attention, I think, than trying to, you've more or less removed that triangle of light. It's only partially there, whereas actually I think having it stronger makes him stand out, makes him leap out from the background a little bit more. One of the problems is we can get so caught up in the idea of worrying about blown highlights or things lost in shadow that we end up sort of pushing everything into the middle. And when you push everything into the middle, you then actually lose the contrast, and it's the contrast which is actually the really interesting bit. It's the bit that makes him stand out. And what makes him stand out here is this triangle of light behind him. It's almost like a kind of, shaft of light there, Paul. And if you edit it too much shadow coming in, making too much light out of the shadow and making too much and darkening down the highlights too much, I think we end up with the problem of it just kind of merging into one. Allow for the contrast, and I think actually this creates a much better story. I would say though as well that there is another thing here, which is that whilst that is, I think that works better as an edit, I think there is also the fact that it's probably not quite as strong an image as you would have hoped for in the way that it is in your head. And what I mean by that is when we look back at your original, what's happening here is you're somewhere and you spot someone and he's standing out from the crowd. If he wasn't standing out from the crowd, you would never have noticed him, you would never have tried photographing him. But when you cut away that crowd, there's only him. And because he's... Now, okay, if you had him as a subject on a portrait level, then you would say, what's interesting about him? We like the hair, we like the beard, we like the jacket, we like the texture, we like the attitude, we like, that a sense of other. And at that point, though, you would then do a portrait where you would get him looking into the camera. You would get him taking an expression. You would get him moving his body in a particular way. Or but you're not able to do that because this is a quick capture. But the thing about the quick capture is that it's about him in that environment. And the problem, I think, really is you haven't quite caught him in the environment. The environment is in the street, and in a way you need to be further back and get more of a sense of the other people around him. If you look at this guy on the right, who's unfortunately been cut off, now he looks much more your average kind of Joe. He's just got a kind of plain cap on, he's clean shaven, short haired, looks like a bicycle helmet sitting on his backpack. Now, if everybody is around him is sort of looking something like that, and then you get this guy coming in with the long hair and the beard and the leather jacket, then, oh my God, yes, he stands out. But that standing out only makes sense if you compare him to the people that are around him. But you don't have enough of them. So therein, I think, lies one of the trickiest things about street photography in the first place. But anyway, you went in, you cropped in, you got him, and the other thing, and as I said, the main thing I think there was about the idea of using that sort of triangle of light to more effect. Right, okay, so we've done Stacey, we've done Paul, we've done Manoj, VG. Okay, VG, where are you? Actually, I will just do a quick check back. Has anybody come back? Stacey, don't know what happened. Maggie's people still here. Well, that's good. I've got people. And Stacey, do you have a hurricane too? We do have a storm. We don't have a hurricane. We very rarely get hurricanes in the UK. But it's just a bit wild and windy here. Nothing to the same extent. Right. Okay. Let's... Where am I? Okay. So now, VG, I think... What we'll do, I'm going to just, I won't spend too long, but I just want to kind of address a particular point. So VG found this log. Now, right, hi Kim. This was a piece of log on a beach. I tried taking photographs of it. The colour one shows a distant shot. of how the log looked like, and I started to go closer. So she then came in closer, has gone black and white, and explored a couple of different versions and ways of doing it. The question then is there a perspective I should have tried and the dead log might have sprung up alive? Okay, I get you with this, BG. That, and we have, you know, we're down at the beach. There's something. There's a log on the beach. It's different. It's standing out. That looks interesting. What can I do to make that look a bit more interesting? Because obviously here, when we look at it, it's just one aspect. It's not really standing out. And if we go to your next picture here, now you've zoomed in, you've cropped the image, you made a more balanced, straighten horizon and what have you, but it's what the story here doesn't look like the log. We've got this sandbank here really kind of grabs a lot of the attention. And if you're trying to make a thing out of the log, then yes, you're right. There's two ways you can do it. You've either got to kind of come back and place the log in a context which is making it interesting. You've got to think, what is the interesting part of this? Is it about the fact that it's floating in the water? Is it about the fact that it's half on the beach, or that it's in between? And how are you going to capture that? Or you go in closer, which is what you did here. So with this one and this one, you've come in closer to try and get something out of it. Now, partly, I think one of the things you've done here is you've gone black and white, and that's a good trick quite often for getting texture. Sometimes colours interfere with your sense of depth of texture, except for the fact that I think here what's happening is your contrast is between the log and the water. And the fact that the water is very textured and the log is very textured are kind of playing against each other a little bit. And I half wonder actually here whether this might have been better kept in colour. Because in colour you would have had the browns, the yellowy browns of the wood, but then you would have the bluishness of the water. And that contrast, I think, would have helped. Then you've got this is wood in the water, as opposed to this is one set of lines against another set of lines. With this one, again, I think the colour might have worked. What you've got here is quite a nice, interesting shape as it sort of veers round to the left. But I think in terms of the compositional layout, excuse me, what we're kind of up against here is the fact that it's kind of in the middle. It veers to the left, and then what it means is that all this space over on the right is not really contributing anything. So if I just, what I'll do is I'll do content aware here. If I just move this to something like that, and then edit this, so hopefully we end up with a bit more sea over on this side. Yeah, something like that. Even something as simple as that, I think, gives it slightly more space. This little bit down here is grabbing the attention in a way that isn't really helping, I don't think. So just kind of get rid of a couple of little bits of that. Having said that, we've still got a bit of a gap here. Do we make it longer? So pull it in, something like that, make a portrait out of it. And I think maybe that works better. That's maybe better as a shape. We're still there though with the fact that I think there's probably some interesting textures down in the front of the wood here, which we've lost in the hard shadow. There could be more interesting. Now you come in close here, and there's potential beautiful bits of texture in around here, which we're not really able to see because you're taken from further back. But then we're also, I certainly think VG, the colour I think would have maybe worked better this, and then playing around with the contrasts and what have you. So back to is there a perspective you should have tried and the dead log might have sort of suddenly kind of leapt out and popped and what have you? I think you were doing the right things. You're going in there, you're experimenting, you're exploring. and unless I was actually there, I wouldn't know the best angle for it. But you're trying that, which is exactly what you need to do. But I wouldn't be quite so quick to necessarily turn it to black and white. Now I don't know whether you had the black and white settings, you set it to black and white on the camera, or whether you did it black and white in post production. If you've still got the color version, I would maybe go back, revisit this, try cropping it again, play around with the color version, just see what you can get out of it. But really, it's back to the what story are you trying to find? What is it you find interesting about that log? What is it that's taking you down the beach to go up to it with the camera? Can you identify that? And the better, if you're going, what I really love is the texture, or what I really love is the way that it's offset against the water, or the fact that it crosses, there's a span between land and water with this old log in it. Is it the fact that it's a dead tree? You know, what are the bits that are really grabbing your attention? And the clearer you can be about that, the more you can then use your composition and lighting and cropping and colour to enhance that particular story. So I hope that helps a bit. Right. Okay, right, well, VG's come back in. Definitely the portrait works, and next time on colour it is then. We'll convert. Great. I would always say take the photos in colour. Don't use the auto black and white. You can always change it to black and white. Right. Okay, finally then, for last one I'm going to do, I'm going to go back to Manoj. This is Manoj's first time submitting something. I know, regular watcher, but this is your first time submitting something. So I will do a second photo here. Now, let's flip back here, close these. And the photo that I'm going to pick on is this one. So again, you didn't tell me much about it other than the title is Serbia. So I'm assuming a trip to Serbia it was. And really, I suppose, I don't know, do I have, what did you say? Okay, looking for insights. So, a few different things about this. I suppose the first thing is, by the look of it, this, I don't know Serbia, I don't know this place where you are in it, but obviously what we have is statue on top of column and what looks like then a view over the city in the distance. So I can imagine it's quite an impressive place to be, that, you know, whether you've got a tram or a bus to the top, or where you've had to climb several hundred steps to get to the top of it, you're going to get up there and you're going to look and there's going to be a view and you're going to go, wow. And this statue on the column is grabbing your attention and you think, this is what it's about, and I'm going to take that photo. Now, first thing, well, a couple of things. Really, what we're talking about here is exposure and also composition. And the exposure, what we're very aware of is that, a bit like Stacy and the problem with as soon as you have the sun, the highlights are completely blown out here. There's some interesting textures in the cloud, but there's this great big white patch, which, now the fact that we can still make out detail in the column means that, and there's even a bit of detail in the statue, means obviously this is where you were exposing for, which means the sun itself is overexposed. If you'd exposed for where the sun is, then this would have been completely black in silhouette. Now maybe it might have worked completely black in silhouette. I mean, if I just go and grab the curves, for example, and pull that down, you can instantly see that that which is basically underexposed for the column, but better exposed for the sky, we're not getting back the details because that's already gone. But had you do it underexposed, then you would have had a bit more detail around the sun area as well. Then what we're up against is we're up against the silhouette, and we've got the silhouette. Now, maybe if you know that statue becomes really important and that silhouette is really recognizable. If you don't, then is it an interesting shape? maybe I don't really know what the statue is, so it's maybe not doing it for me so much, but maybe it does more for you, and that's okay. One of the things, this column definitely feels slightly tilted. I want to straighten it up. That automatically feels a little bit better, except for the fact that we now notice that the buildings, let's just come back here, and it's the nature of the wide angle lens, but, or the wide, actually what settings do you have for this? So f11, focal length 20mm, yeah, so we are quite wide angle, so it's distorted out. Now we could then play around and straighten that out. I won't for the moment, because otherwise we'll be here till midnight. Well, of course, you're in India, it's well past midnight there. A couple of other things, there's obviously some kind of spots on the lens, which again in editing you would just sort of do that, just remove those, because they're kind of grabbing a little bit of attention where perhaps they shouldn't. They're drawing, because they're darker on a light area, they're drawing the attention. Basically, actually, let's just go back and put those back in, just to get across the point that your eye gets drawn to places of contrast. Now, the biggest contrast is the statue against the sun here, but there's also contrast here where you've got these spots on the lens. Now, if you're playing, so we can talk about playing around with exposure and cleaning it up. I think the thing is also here though is crop, and the crop is about where the story is. Now the first thing that we've got here, apart from straightening it, is that it's smack bang in the middle of the photo. And if we go back to one of the things I've talked about in earlier podcasts, is the middle is generally speaking the least interesting part of the photo. The moment you go off center, it becomes more interesting. So the fact is, so how do you crop this? Now, this then comes back to where's the story. If the story is all about this column, then if you take this and you, well, if say it was just about the statue itself, then you could do something like this, where again you can see he's sitting in that point of where the third across and third down meets. And now you've got, let's do that. So now it's got nothing to do with the city, but it's all about this column, the statue on top of it, and the incredible sky against it. So that's a story. That's a story there. And if you knew that was the story you were going for, then you would adjust your settings accordingly. You would have, you know, you're on, what are you on? 500th of a second, maybe go up to 2000th of a second. You're on f11, maybe you take it up to f16. You play around until you've got the level of exposure you want, which is really bringing out the detail in the clouds and isn't whiting out with the sun. So that's one story. Let's go back here. If you wanted to have the whole column in, you could just as easily create a portrait, something like that. And again, if you wanted to do the silhouette, do the dark, and then it's all about this. But what we're aware of though here is when we do that, we haven't got the city in. Now part of the problem here is that you're standing too far back from the edge to really be able to get the city in as well. And really, to be able to get the city and the statue, you needed to have been higher up and back, so that you could be sort of looking down past the statue, almost over the shoulder of the statue, down at the city. Now that would be a great shot, but I've got no idea whether there was anywhere you could have stood. Probably not. Chances are this statue's on top of a column, on top of a hill, so that it stands out from wherever you're at. You'd have to have a drone or something to look at that. So it's a difficult one to get the statue and the city in. But there's another little story here, which is these people looking down at the, you know, here we've got something like this. So let's just come out. You know, here the statue isn't so important, but what's actually is the fact that it's a lookout place. So we could do something like this. And actually now at this point, because those buildings do look like they're falling over in an earthquake, I'll just grab that corner, straighten that up, so that we're not worrying about it quite so much. I've maybe also over tilted the column, so I'll just tilt that one back a bit. Not sure, actually, no, I've lost the horizon there. Need to play around with that one a little bit more. But what we do have is we have these people in it, and maybe these people become a little bit more interesting. I'll go up to Camera Raw and just bring out a bit more detail from the shadows. Take down the highlights a bit, play around with the clarity a bit. And now you can see these people stand out a little bit more. So there's different stories within that, and then it's so, you know, let's go back. So hopefully, Manoj, that's kind of giving you some thoughts as to how to play around with this. First of all, try and avoid things being dead in the center. Pretty sure you know this already now. But if you've got that picture, play around with the different crops. Decide where the story is. Is the story about that statue against the sky, in which case expose for the sky, get the silhouette? Is the story about people looking down over the city, in which case, although it's nice to have the statue's less important than the fact that you've got the people in it. So hopefully then that gives you a little bit to play with. So let's just do one last little flip back. Marcus has come in. Hi Marcus, good to see you. Clever, not sure which bit you're referring to, but I will always take a compliment. Thank you, Marcus. Right, so that pretty much brings us to the end of this one. If you found it useful and you feel like you would like to contribute, then feel free to buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres. Next week, I will be... I think what I'm going to be doing is looking at... there's a screen printer, a friend of mine who does screen printing, and I did a set of photos for him in a very, very enclosed space, but I was quite pleased with the way they came out. And there's a whole notion of taking a photograph of somebody while they're working in a space. So I think there's some interesting things to be had in that. Plus, of course, there's the critique. So if you found the critique section interesting, if you would like to get your own photos into the critique, then make sure you join the group Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, and submit your images, and I'll take a look at them next week. So thank you very much for joining me, and enjoy the rest of your week. Take care. Bye-bye.